way we were treated the night before our wedding. Supposed to be a joyful time celebrating the last night as Plath. But it was actually the hardest night of my life.
Lydia, I felt awful after.
And then you guys are going to Montana afterwards.
Yep.
Isaac and Ethan are out there right now, aren't they? Visiting Mariah?
Yeah.
It would have been fun to be able to join them on this trip, but I didn't really hear about it till last minute. But I already have a trip planned to Montana, like next month, so it'll all be good.
I think they're out there now, and we'll be out there in like 3 weeks.
The Plath family finally apologized to Lydia and Zac. Ethan admitted he handled things badly. Micah said he acted foolishly. Barry welcomed Zac into the family and made it clear that, as far as he was concerned, the wedding drama was over. For one brief moment, it looked like the family had finally chosen peace. But that apology was not the ending. It was barely the intermission. Only a few episodes later, Lydia and Zac were right back on the outside. They were hearing about family plans after everybody else. They were watching siblings take trips without them. And Lydia was once again left with the same painful feeling she has carried for years. Everybody remembers her when they need the dependable daughter, but somehow forgets her when the fun starts. Then the story flipped. The couple who spent the season asking the Plaths to stop judging their marriage started getting accused of judging everybody else. Zac, who was furious when Lydia's brothers questioned his relationship, started asking Ethan some very personal questions about Teegan. Lydia, who wanted her family to respect her beliefs and her choices, was accused of using those beliefs as a measuring stick for everyone around her. So the question is not simply whether the Plaths treated Lydia and Zac badly. They clearly did at certain points. The real question is this. Did the family turn Zac into its newest scapegoat, or did Zac slowly start acting less like Lydia's husband and more like the Plath family's unofficial relationship supervisor? And is Lydia being excluded because she is the forgotten middle child? Or has her loyalty to Zac created a new wall between her and her siblings? Let's rewind. Lydia and Zac got engaged after roughly 3 months together, then married only a few months later. That is fast. Even by reality television standards, where people meet, get engaged, and start arguing over kitchen cabinets before the commercial break, this relationship moved quickly. Several of Lydia's brothers were concerned. Ethan, Micah, and others questioned whether Lydia really knew Zac well enough. They questioned his motives and whether the relationship had enough time to develop naturally. At one point, the conversation became so personal that Zac's sexuality was brought into it. That was where concern crossed into invasion. There is a difference between saying, "Lydia, we love you, and we are worried this is happening too fast," and turning somebody's identity into family debate material. Lydia later described the night before her wedding as one of the most painful nights of her life. Think about that. This was supposed to be the final joyful night before she got married. Instead, she was defending her future husband from the people whose support mattered most. Now, it is easy to watch that scene and say the family was completely wrong about everything. The truth is more complicated. Their concern about the speed of the relationship was reasonable. But reasonable concern can still be handled in a completely unreasonable way. A conversation stops being protective when the person you claim to be protecting feels cornered and forced to defend herself at the worst possible time. If the brothers truly wanted Lydia to slow down and think, that conversation needed to happen early, not the night before the wedding. By then the decision had been made. So the meeting was not really about changing Lydia's mind. It was about the family making sure they had said their piece, timing be damned. And sometimes people confuse saying everything they feel with doing something helpful. Those are not the same thing. The family may have believed they were warning Lydia, but what they actually did was force her to choose sides. The second that happened, Zac became more than her fiancé. He became the one person standing beside her while everybody else questioned her judgment. That moment cemented Zac's role as Lydia's protector. He became the shield, the person who steps in when Lydia feels ignored, judged, or misunderstood. First, that role made sense. But protector roles can become complicated quickly. Once you see yourself as the only person who truly understands your partner, every disagreement can look like an attack. Every missed invitation becomes rejection. Every question becomes disrespect. Every relative becomes somebody you may need to manage. And later in the season, that is where the story starts to shift. The biggest contradiction in the wedding storyline is this. Lydia's brothers claimed they wanted her to think independently, but confronting her as a group did not create independence. created a bunker. It pushed Lydia closer to Zac and farther from them. The family wanted her to step back and think, but their approach gave her every emotional reason to do the opposite. That brings us to the Montana trip. At first, the trip seems like a small issue. Lydia and Zac heard about it late. Other siblings were already involved. Plans were already moving. Lydia once again felt like an afterthought. But her reaction tells us this was never only about Montana. Lydia connected it to a much older wound. She said she has often felt overlooked as a middle child, like she was standing outside the family looking in. That is the emotional center of this entire storyline. Not Zac. Not the wedding. Not even the trip. It is Lydia's belief that she has spent years being dependable without ever feeling fully chosen. When somebody carries that kind of wound, small moments do not feel small. A late invitation feels like proof. A forgotten message feels like a pattern. A sibling trip feels like confirmation that everybody is closer to each other than they are to you. Zac absorbed that pain. When you love somebody, you notice every place where they feel dismissed. But that also means Zac began looking at the Plaths through Lydia's hurt. Every missed invitation became evidence that the family did not value her. Every awkward conversation became proof they still did not accept him. That is where protection can turn into suspicion. And once suspicion becomes the lens, even ordinary family disorganization can look intentional. To be fair, the Plaths are not known for clear communication. This family rarely deals with conflict directly, privately, and in the moment. Instead, somebody tells a sibling. That sibling tells another sibling. Then the issue appears in a confessional. Finally, it becomes a group meeting where everyone is defending themselves against different versions of the same complaint. By the time the confrontation happens, everybody is reacting to what they heard somebody else supposedly meant. That is triangulation. And it is one of the biggest reasons this family keeps repeating the same conflicts. And Zac walked into a system where every concern becomes group property. The irony is that he hated being discussed that way, but later he began asking Ethan questions Ethan clearly did not want to answer. This is where reverse sympathy becomes important. Zac wanted the brothers to ask him questions directly instead of talking behind his back. Fair. But when he questioned Ethan about Teegan, Ethan looked uncomfortable. Zac wanted to know why Ethan was moving, what the timeline was, whether they were getting back together, and whether the decision made sense. Honestly, those were not ridiculous questions. Ethan was planning to move across the country for an ex while admitting he did not know where the relationship stood. Anybody watching would have questions. But the issue is not whether the questions were logical. The issue is whether Zac had earned the level of access he was demanding. He spent months arguing that Lydia's brothers crossed a boundary by interrogating their relationship. Then he stepped into Ethan's relationship and did something very similar. Maybe his intentions were better. Maybe he believed Ethan needed somebody to ask the uncomfortable questions. But people rarely see their own interference as interference. They call it concern. That is exactly what the Plath brothers said before the wedding. Everybody believes their judgment is wisdom, and everybody else's judgment is control. Then religion takes the conflict to another level. Lydia and Zac's shared faith was originally presented as one of the strongest parts of their relationship. It gave their courtship structure, and gave Lydia confidence that Zac understood the values that mattered to her. Later, family members accused the couple of turning those beliefs into rules for everyone else. Alcohol became an issue. Television choices became an issue. Adult humor became an issue. Lydia responded that some concerns were about the younger siblings, and some were simply personal boundaries. And she has every right to have those boundaries. She can choose not to drink. She can leave a room. She can decide a joke is not funny. She can say, "That is not something I want to participate in." The real question is how that boundary is communicated. There is a major difference between saying, "I am not comfortable with this," and saying, "You should not be comfortable with this either." One protects your values. The other grades everybody else's. The older Plath children pushed back against the strict rules they grew up with because they felt controlled. Now Lydia and Zac appear to be bringing some of those values back into the family. And the siblings hear it as the old system returning through a new couple. That does not mean Lydia is wrong for being religious. It means personal conviction becomes dangerous when it is presented as authority over other adults. This is where both sides become sympathetic and frustrating at the same time. Lydia and Zac were treated unfairly before the wedding. The family's timing was cruel. Zac was asked invasive questions. Lydia felt humiliated. And her feelings of exclusion existed long before Zac arrived. But the family also has a point when they say marriage does not automatically make Zac the authority on Ethan, Isaac, Mariah, or anyone else. Becoming part of a family does not mean becoming its referee. And supporting Lydia does not require Zac to manage every conversation she has with her siblings. Online, the fan reaction is just as divided. After the finale, viewers criticized a confessional where Zac appeared to interrupt Lydia or answer for her. Lydia defended him publicly. She said she was not offended, explained that the interview happened after a long filming day, and reminded viewers that the audience sees only a small piece of their relationship. That matters. Reality television gives us edited behavior, not full access to a marriage. A short scene can reveal something real, but it cannot prove everything fans sometimes want it to prove. Still, the reaction fell into three camps. The first camp believes Zac was scapegoated. These viewers see a familiar Plath pattern. An adult child becomes serious with somebody outside the family. That partner gets blamed for changes already happening. The family focuses on the outsider instead of examining its own behavior. Some fans connect Zac to earlier conflicts involving other partners and argue the Plaths repeatedly need one person to represent everything they dislike about change. The second camp believes Zac slowly became the problem. These viewers point to the way he questioned Ethan, the religious conflict in Montana, and moments where he seemed to speak for Lydia. Their argument is simple. Being mistreated at the beginning does not give somebody permanent immunity from criticism later. Then there is the third camp, which may be the strongest position. Both things can be true. The Plaths can treat Zac unfairly, and Zac can still overstep. Lydia can be genuinely hurt by exclusion, and she can still communicate her beliefs in a way that feels judgmental. The family can have legitimate concerns, and they can still express those concerns in damaging ways. There is also a fan theory that production deliberately changed Zac's edit. Some viewers believe he was presented sympathetically early in the season, then repositioned as a problem later because the show needed conflict. That is an interesting theory. Reality shows absolutely shape storylines through editing, scene order, music, confessionals, and producer-guided conversations. But there is no confirmed proof that Zac received a planned villain edit, so it should stay where it belongs, in the theory category. Now let's zoom out because the deeper pattern is bigger than Zac. The Plath family has a repeating outsider cycle. A family member enters a serious relationship. That relationship becomes connected to changes in the family member's personality or priorities. Private frustrations turn into group concerns. The partner becomes the symbol of the problem. The couple withdraws. Then the withdrawal is used as proof that the partner is isolating the family member. And the cycle starts again. The family focuses on the outsider because blaming one person is easier than admitting the family itself is changing. And Zac may be walking into that role while also helping create it. There are two warning signs worth watching. The first is how fused Lydia and Zac appear to be. A married couple should support each other. But when every criticism of Zac becomes an attack on Lydia, and every criticism of Lydia becomes an attack on Zac, the marriage starts functioning like a defensive unit. That makes independent family relationships difficult. Lydia cannot disagree with her siblings without Zac feeling responsible for protecting her. Her siblings cannot raise a concern about Zac without Lydia hearing it as rejection of her marriage. Zac cannot step back without feeling like he is abandoning the woman he promised to defend. That is how closeness can become isolation without anybody consciously choosing it. The second warning sign is Zac's protector identity. If he believes Lydia has been overlooked her entire life, he may feel it is his duty to step in whenever she is hurt. That instinct may come from love. But love does not automatically make every behavior healthy. There is a difference between supporting your spouse and becoming the gatekeeper for every relationship in your spouse's life. There is a difference between helping Lydia speak and speaking because you assume she cannot. And if Zac cannot separate those things, his protection may eventually become another form of pressure. The long-term danger is not one dramatic family explosion. It is something quieter. Lydia slowly sees her siblings less. Invitations become awkward. Group trips happen without them. Everybody has a different explanation for who pulled away first. Lydia and Zac say the family excluded them. The family says Zac made closeness impossible. Years later, nobody remembers where the distance started because every person has collected enough evidence to support their own version. That is why another giant family meeting probably will not fix this. Those meetings produce apologies, tears, and one clean episode ending. But they do not change the communication system underneath the conflict. Real repair would require individual conversations. Lydia with Ethan. Zac with Micah. Lydia with her mother. Zac listening without answering for Lydia. The siblings raising concerns without turning them into group investigations. That is slower and less dramatic, which is probably why reality television avoids it whenever possible. So where does this go next? My prediction is that Lydia and Zac continue pulling back whenever they believe the family is talking about them privately. The family will interpret that distance as proof that Zac is isolating Lydia. That accusation will make Zac more defensive. Lydia will defend him publicly, because she believes people are misreading the person who stood beside her when she felt abandoned. And Zac will continue absorbing blame for opinions Lydia may share, partly because he has made himself the louder voice in the conflict. I do not think this necessarily ends in divorce. Nothing in this storyline proves the marriage itself is collapsing. The bigger risk is family separation. Fewer visits. Fewer invitations. More guarded conversations. More arguments about religion, respect, and who is allowed to question whom. And both sides will probably describe that distance as something the other side chose. So let's bring it back to the beginning. The Plaths had valid reasons to worry about how quickly Lydia and Zac moved. But the way they handled it was damaging. They waited too long, made it too personal, and cornered Lydia when she was most emotionally vulnerable. They helped create the exact loyalty divide they were afraid of. But Lydia and Zac's later behavior complicates the idea that they are only victims. Questioning Ethan, judging lifestyle choices, and treating personal values like family rules makes their demand for unconditional acceptance harder to defend. At the center of all of this is Lydia's statement about being the forgotten middle child. That line explains almost everything. She is a woman who has felt overlooked for years. She married somebody willing to fight for her. And now that protection may be turning into a wall. The same kind of wall Lydia always believed her family had built around her. That is the tragedy of this storyline. Everybody claims to want closeness. But everybody is protecting themselves in a way that makes closeness less possible. The Plaths call it concern. Lydia calls it exclusion. Zac calls it protection. The siblings call it judgment. And underneath all those labels is the same unresolved question. Where does a boundary end and control begin? So now I want your honest take. Were Lydia and Zac unfairly turned into the Plath family's newest scapegoats? Or did they lose your sympathy when they started judging everybody else the same way they had been judged? And do you think Zac is helping Lydia finally stand up for herself? Or is he slowly becoming another person speaking on her behalf? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this is one of those storylines where the answer depends on which scene you believe reveals the real relationship. And I'll see you in the next video.